30 cheap hillbilly sandwiches from working-class kitchens in the 1970s, the ones your family ate but never talked about, so shameful they still won't admit it, kept poor families alive when payday was 3 days away.
30 cheap hillbilly sandwiches from working-class kitchens in the 1970s.
Mayonnaise on white bread, butter and sugar, ketchup and crackers pressed between slices. Your grandmother made these for pennies when the pantry was empty and pride was all she had left.
We'd make sandwiches out of anything. Butter and sugar, mayonnaise on bread, even ketchup and crackles if that's all there was.
Today, nobody admits it. They vanished when poverty stopped being something you survived together and started being something you hid alone. We're bringing them back, proof that love feeds people when money can't. Here's number 1. Mayonnaise. Sandwich, the sandwich that was exactly what it sounds like. This was white bread with mayonnaise, spread thick between 2 slices. Nothing else. In 1970, this cost about 3 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 25 cents today. A loaf of white bread cost 25 cents. A jar of mayonnaise cost 40 cents and lasted for weeks. When there was no lunch meat, no cheese, no leftovers, there was mayonnaise. The fat in the mayo provided calories. The bread provided bulk. Together, they kept you from being hungry until dinner. Kids ate these for school lunch when their parents couldn't afford anything else. The mayo made the bread less dry. Some families added salt and pepper to make it feel more like food. This sandwich disappeared when admitting you ate it became shameful. By the 1990s, mayonnaise sandwiches were the punchline of poverty jokes. But in the 1970s, this was survival. You can still make it for about 30 cents today. Butter and sugar sandwich, dessert when there was no dessert. This was white bread, spread with butter and sprinkled with white sugar. In 1970, this cost about 4 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 30 cents today. Butter was expensive at 70 cents per pound, but you used so little per sandwich that it stretched. Sugar was cheap. A 5-pound bag cost 60 cents and lasted months. This was what kids got as a treat when there was no money for cookies or cake. The butter melted slightly into the bread. The sugar added crunch and sweetness. Some families toasted the bread first so the butter would melt completely. Others ate it cold. This sandwich disappeared when it became associated with Depression-era poverty. By the 1980s, parents who'd grown up eating these refused to make them for their own children. They wanted their kids to have better. But butter and sugar sandwiches were comfort food for a generation. You can make them for about 35 cents today. Ketchup sandwich, the sandwich that replaced tomatoes. This was white bread with ketchup spread between 2 slices, sometimes with butter, sometimes without. In 1970, this cost about 2 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 20 cents today. Ketchup was cheaper than fresh tomatoes. A bottle cost 30 cents and lasted for weeks. Fresh tomatoes cost 40 cents per pound and went bad quickly. Ketchup was tomato flavor that didn't spoil. It was sweet, tangy, and filling enough to make plain bread feel like a meal. Some families added a slice of cheese if they had it. Most didn't. Kids ate these and pretended they were eating real tomato sandwiches. The ketchup soaked into the bread and made it soggy, but that was better than dry bread alone. This sandwich disappeared when people stopped admitting they'd eaten it. Ketchup sandwiches became the ultimate symbol of being poor, worse than mayonnaise sandwiches because ketchup was a condiment, not even real food. You can make them for about 25 cents today. Peanut butter and crackers sandwich when you ran out of jelly. This was peanut butter spread on bread with saltine crackers pressed into it for crunch. In 1970, this cost about 5 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 40 cents today. Peanut butter was protein. A jar cost 65 cents and fed a family for days. Crackers were cheap. A box of saltines cost 20 cents. When there was no jelly, you used crackers instead. The crackers added texture and salt. The peanut butter held them in place. Some families crushed the crackers first. Others left them whole and bit through them. The result was crunchy, salty, and filling. This sandwich disappeared when peanut butter and jelly became the default. By the 1980s, PB&J was so standard that admitting you ate peanut butter with crackers instead meant you were too poor for jelly. You can make them for about 45 cents today. Fried bologna sandwich, the hot meal that wasn't really a meal. This was a slice of bologna fried in a pan until the edges curled up, placed between white bread with mustard. In 1970, this cost about 8 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 65 cents today.
You know, back then we didn't have much, but we had each other. Payday was still days away.
Bologna was the cheapest lunch meat. A pound cost 50 cents and made 8 sandwiches. Frying it made it feel more substantial. The edges would curl and crisp. The center would stay soft and warm. You'd put it on bread with yellow mustard, the cheap kind that cost 20 cents per bottle. Some families added a slice of American cheese if they had it. The hot bologna would melt the cheese slightly. This was dinner when there was nothing else to cook. Fried bologna sandwiches disappeared when bologna became associated with poverty and processed food. By the 2000s, nobody wanted to admit they ate it, but in the 1970s, this was a hot meal. You can make them for about 70 cents today. Every single one of these was survival food. Every single one cost under 10 cents in 1970. Every single one disappeared when people had enough money to forget they'd ever been poor. But here's where it gets real. The next 5 sandwiches are even more desperate. These are the sandwiches you made when you couldn't afford bologna, when the pantry was nearly empty and payday was 3 days away. If you've never been poor enough to eat these, you're lucky. Let's keep going. Lard sandwich, the sandwich that was pure fat and nothing else. This was white bread spread with lard and sprinkled with salt. In 1970, this cost about 1 cent per sandwich. That's roughly 10 cents today. Lard was cooking fat. A can cost 40 cents and lasted for months. When there was no butter, no mayonnaise, no peanut butter, there was lard. It was white, soft, and spreadable. You'd spread it on bread like butter. Sprinkle salt on top. The lard provided calories and fat. The salt made it taste like something. Some families added pepper or garlic powder if they had it. This was what you ate when there was literally nothing else in the house. Lard sandwiches disappeared when lard itself disappeared from kitchens. By the 1980s, vegetable oil replaced lard for cooking. Nobody kept lard around anymore, and nobody wanted to admit they'd eaten it on bread. You can still buy lard for about $3 per pound and make these for 15 cents today. Pickle and cheese sandwich, when pickles were cheaper than vegetables. This was white bread with a slice of American cheese and dill pickle slices. In 1970, this cost about 6 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 50 cents today. A jar of dill pickles cost 40 cents and lasted for weeks. American cheese was expensive at 90 cents per pound, but you only needed 1 slice. Fresh vegetables cost more and went bad. Pickles didn't spoil. They added crunch, tang, and made the sandwich feel more complete. Some families added mayonnaise, others ate it dry. The pickle juice would soak into the bread slightly. The cheese added protein and made it feel like a real sandwich. This disappeared when people realized pickles on sandwiches marked you as poor. By the 1990s, pickles were garnish, not the main ingredient. You can make them for about 55 cents today. Cornbread and milk, not technically a sandwich, but it filled the same need. This was leftover cornbread crumbled into a glass of milk. In 1970, this cost about 4 cents per serving. That's roughly 30 cents today. Cornmeal was cheap. A bag cost 30 cents and made dozens of batches of cornbread. Milk was subsidized and affordable. A gallon cost $1.15. When there was no bread for sandwiches, There was cornbread. You'd crumble it into a glass, pour milk over it, eat it with a spoon. The cornbread would soak up the milk and become soft. The milk would turn slightly sweet from the cornmeal. This was breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on what else was available. Cornbread and milk disappeared when it became associated with rural poverty. By the 1980s, it was something only poor Southern families ate. You can make it for about 35 cents today. Mustard sandwich, even more desperate than ketchup. This was white bread with yellow mustard spread between two slices, nothing else. In 1970, this cost about 2 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 20 cents today. Mustard was cheaper than ketchup. A bottle cost 20 cents. When there was no ketchup, no mayonnaise, no peanut butter, there was mustard. It was tangy and strong enough to make plain bread taste like something. You'd spread it thin because too much would burn your mouth. Some families added salt. Others ate it straight. Kids hated these. The mustard was too strong, too bitter, but it was food. Mustard sandwiches disappeared because nobody, absolutely nobody, wants to admit they ate these. Even people who ate mayonnaise sandwiches draw the line at mustard. You can make them for about 25 cents today. Toast sandwich. Yes, this is real, and yes, people ate it. This was a piece of toasted bread between two slices of untoasted bread. In 1970, this cost about 3 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 25 cents today. The concept was simple. Toast added flavor and texture to plain bread. You'd toast one slice until it was golden and crispy. Place it between two slices of soft white bread. Sometimes you'd add butter or salt to the toast. Sometimes you ate it dry. The contrast between crispy toast and soft bread made it feel more substantial than just eating 3 slices of plain bread. This was Victorian-era poverty food that survived into the 1970s in the poorest households. Toast sandwiches disappeared because they're absurd. Bread inside bread. By the 1980s, nobody would admit they'd eaten these, but they were real. You can make them for about 30 cents today. And here's what you're noticing. These weren't recipes. These were solutions. When you're poor, you don't follow cookbooks. You use what you have. The next 10 sandwiches show how creative people got when money was tight. These are the sandwiches that used leftovers, stretched ingredients, and turned almost nothing into something edible. Let's keep going. Fried egg sandwich, protein when meat was too expensive. This was a fried egg between 2 slices of white bread. In 1970, this cost about 7 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 55 cents today. Eggs were cheap protein. A dozen cost 50 cents. One egg made a sandwich. You'd fry it in whatever fat you had, lard, bacon grease, or margarine. The yolk would run when you bit into it, soaking into the bread. Some families added salt and pepper. Others added hot sauce if they had it. The egg provided protein and made the sandwich filling. This was breakfast or lunch, depending on what else was available. Fried egg sandwiches never disappeared. They evolved into breakfast sandwiches at fast food restaurants. But the plain version, just egg and bread, marked you as poor. You can make them for about 60 cents today. Spam sandwich, canned meat that lasted forever. This was sliced spam between white bread with mustard. In 1970, this cost about 12 cents per sandwich. That's roughly $1 today. A can of Spam cost 80 cents and made 6 sandwiches. Spam didn't need refrigeration until you opened it. It lasted for years on the shelf. When you couldn't afford fresh meat or bologna, you had Spam. You'd slice it thick and eat it cold. Some families fried it first to make it feel more like real meat. The mustard cut through the saltiness. Spam sandwiches disappeared when Spam became a punchline. By the 1990s, Spam was the ultimate poverty food joke. But in the 1970s, it was reliable protein that didn't spoil. You can make them for about $1.10 today. Biscuit and gravy sandwich, Southern poverty food at its finest. This was a leftover biscuit split open with sausage gravy spooned inside. In 1970, this cost about 8 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 65 cents today. Biscuits were made from flour, lard, and buttermilk, cheap ingredients. Sausage gravy was made from breakfast, sausage drippings, flour, and milk. When there was leftover gravy from breakfast, you'd put it on biscuits for lunch. The gravy would soak into the biscuit. The result was filling, warm, and satisfying. This was comfort food that cost almost nothing. Biscuit and gravy sandwiches never fully disappeared in the South, but they became restaurant food instead of poverty food. You can make them for about 70 cents today. Cheese sandwich, just cheese, nothing else. This was white bread with a slice of American cheese. No butter, no mayonnaise, no mustard. In 1970, this cost about 5 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 40 cents today. American cheese was expensive, but one slice made a sandwich. When there was no lunch meat, cheese was protein. You'd eat it cold. No grilling, no toasting, just bread and cheese. Some families added salt and pepper. Others ate it plain. The cheese made the sandwich feel more substantial than mayonnaise or butter alone. Kids ate these for school lunch and pretended they had real sandwiches. Cheese sandwiches disappeared when grilled cheese became the standard. By the 1980s, a cold cheese sandwich meant your family was too poor to waste butter on grilling it. You can make them for about 45 cents today. Tomato sandwich, when gardens saved money. This was white bread with sliced fresh tomato, salt, and pepper, sometimes with mayonnaise, sometimes without. In 1970, this cost about 6 cents per sandwich if you grew the tomatoes yourself. That's roughly 50 cents today. Tomatoes from the grocery store cost 40 cents per pound. Tomatoes from your garden cost nothing but time. In summer, when tomatoes were ripe, families ate tomato sandwiches for lunch every day. The tomatoes were warm from the sun. The juice would soak into the bread. Salt and pepper made them perfect. This was fresh food when most meals came from cans. Tomato sandwiches never disappeared in the South. They're still a summer tradition. But the poverty context did. Now they're considered rustic and artisanal. You can make them for about 60 cents today with store-bought tomatoes. And we're entering different territory now, the sandwiches that showed creativity instead of just desperation. These are the sandwiches that took cheap ingredients and turned them into something people actually wanted to eat. Your grandmother might have been poor, but she wasn't going to serve boring food if she could help it. Let's see what she came up with. Pimento cheese sandwich, Southern poverty food that became a delicacy. This was homemade pimento cheese spread on white bread. In 1970, this cost about 10 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 80 cents today. Pimento cheese was made from shredded cheddar cheese, mayonnaise, and jarred pimentos. A block of cheddar cost 90 cents. A jar of pimentos cost 35 cents and lasted for weeks. You'd shred the cheese yourself. Pre-shredded didn't exist yet. Mix it with mayo and chopped pimentos. The result was creamy, tangy, and filling. This was special occasion poverty food when you wanted something better than plain cheese. Pimento cheese sandwiches never disappeared in the South. They became trendy and expensive in the 2000s, but the homemade version is still cheap. You can make them for about 90 cents today. Vienna sausage sandwich, canned meat that kids actually liked. This was Vienna sausages from a can placed on white bread with mustard. In 1970, this cost about 10 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 80 cents today. A can of Vienna sausages cost 40 cents and made 2 sandwiches. The sausages were small, soft, and salty. Kids liked them because they looked like tiny hot dogs. You'd eat them cold, straight from the can. Some families heated them in a pan first. Place 3 or 4 on bread with yellow mustard. The sausages were squishy and strange, but tasted like meat. Vienna sausage sandwiches disappeared when they became associated with trailer park poverty. By the 2000s, Vienna sausages were a punchline. But in the 1970s, they were affordable protein. You can make them for about 90 cents today. grilled cheese with tomato soup. Not a sandwich alone, but a complete meal. This was white bread, grilled with American cheese, served with canned tomato soup for dipping. In 1970, this cost about 15 cents total. That's roughly $1.20 today. The grilled cheese cost about 8 cents. Bread, cheese, and butter for grilling. A can of tomato soup cost 25 cents and served 2 people. You'd make the soup with water, not milk, to save money. Grill the sandwich in a pan with butter until golden and crispy. Cut it in half. Dip it in the soup. The combination was warm, filling, and felt like real food. This never disappeared. It became comfort food instead of poverty food, but making it with water instead of milk marked you as poor. You can make it for about $1.30 today. Deviled ham sandwich, canned meat that tasted like potted meat. This was deviled ham from a can spread on white bread. In 1970, this cost about 8 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 65 cents today. A can of deviled ham cost 40 cents and made 3 sandwiches. Deviled ham was finely ground ham, mixed with spices and fat. It spread like paste. The flavor was salty, spicy, and intensely meaty. You'd spread it thick on bread. Some families added lettuce if they had it. Most didn't. The deviled ham was filling and tasted stronger than bologna or Spam. Deviled ham sandwiches disappeared when people stopped buying canned meat spreads. By the 1990s, deviled ham was only found in gas stations. You can still buy it for about $2 per can and make these for 70 cents today. Sardine sandwich, canned fish that divided families. This was sardines from a can, mashed with a fork, spread on white bread. In 1970, this cost about 12 cents per sandwich. That's roughly $1 today. A can of sardines cost 50 cents and made 2 sandwiches. Sardines were oily, salty, and fishy. Some people loved them. Kids hated them. You'd drain the oil, mash the sardines with a fork, and spread them on bread. Some families added mustard or hot sauce. Others added chopped onion if they had it. The result was protein-rich and filling. Sardine sandwiches disappeared when sardines became associated with old men and poverty. By the 2000s, nobody under 60 admitted to eating them. You can make them for about $1.10 today. And here's what's remarkable. These last 10 sandwiches show how people took poverty food and made it special. These weren't just survival, they were creativity. When you're poor, you learn to make something from nothing. Your grandmother knew how to turn cheap ingredients into food that felt like a treat. Let's finish strong. Banana sandwich, fruit when fresh fruit was expensive. This was white bread with sliced banana and mayonnaise. In 1970, this cost about 8 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 65 cents today. Bananas were the cheapest fresh fruit, 20 cents per pound. 1 banana made 2 sandwiches. The mayonnaise added fat and made it feel more substantial. Some families added peanut butter instead of mayo. Others used both. The banana provided sweetness and made it feel like dessert. Elvis made this sandwich famous, but poor families had been eating it for decades. Banana sandwiches never fully disappeared. They're still eaten in the South. But the mayo version became strange to people who didn't grow up with it. You can make them for about 70 cents today. Potted meat sandwich, the mystery meat that nobody questioned. This was potted meat from a can spread on white bread. In 1970, this cost about 6 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 50 cents today. A can of potted meat cost 30 cents and made 3 sandwiches. Potted meat was finely ground meat product. Nobody asked what kind of meat. It was pink, smooth, and spreadable. The flavor was salty and vaguely meaty. You'd spread it thick on bread. Some families added pickles or onions. Most ate it plain. Potted meat was cheaper than deviled ham and lasted forever on the shelf. These sandwiches disappeared when people started reading ingredient labels. By the 2000s, potted meat became a joke about poverty and mystery meat. You can still buy it for about $1 per can and make these for 55 cents today. Leftover meatloaf sandwich. when dinner became lunch. This was a slice of cold meatloaf between white bread with ketchup. In 1970, this cost about 10 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 80 cents today. Meatloaf was cheap dinner, ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, and ketchup. A whole meatloaf cost about $2 and fed a family for dinner with leftovers. The next day, you'd slice the cold meatloaf and make sandwiches, add ketchup to the bread. The meatloaf was dense and cold, but still filling. Some families fried the meatloaf slice first to warm it up. This never disappeared. Leftover meatloaf sandwiches are still common. But eating cold meatloaf marked you as too poor to waste energy reheating it. You can make them for about 90 cents today. Butter and jelly sandwich when peanut butter was too expensive. This was white bread with butter and grape jelly. In 1970, this cost about 5 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 40 cents today. Butter was expensive, but you used so little per sandwich. Jelly was cheap. A jar cost 40 cents and lasted for weeks. When there was no peanut butter, you used butter instead. The butter added fat. The jelly added sweetness. Together they made a sandwich that felt like a treat. Kids ate these and wished they had peanut butter, but butter and jelly was better than just jelly on dry bread. These sandwiches disappeared when peanut butter became affordable for everyone. By the 1980s, PB&J was standard. Butter and jelly marked you as too poor for peanut butter. You can make them for about 45 cents today. Onion sandwich when vegetables were just onions. This was white bread with sliced raw onion, salt, and mayonnaise. In 1970, this cost about 4 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 30 cents today. Onions were cheap. A pound cost 15 cents. One onion made a dozen sandwiches. When there were no tomatoes, no lettuce, no other vegetables, there were onions. Onions lasted for weeks without refrigeration. You'd slice them thin, layer them on bread with mayo and salt. The onion was sharp and pungent. The mayo mellowed it slightly. Some families used butter instead of mayo. This was vegetable when vegetables were expensive. Onion sandwiches disappeared when they became associated with Depression-era poverty. By the 1990s, nobody admitted they'd eaten raw onion on bread. You can make them for about 35 cents today. Sugar sandwich, butter and sugar's poorer cousin. This was white bread with margarine and white sugar. In 1970, this cost about 3 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 25 cents today. Margarine was cheaper than butter. A pound cost 40 cents compared to 70 cents for butter. When you couldn't afford butter, you used margarine. Spread it on bread, sprinkle sugar on top. The margarine didn't taste as good as butter, but it was fat and it was cheap. The sugar made it sweet. Kids ate these as treats when there was no candy or cookies. Sugar sandwiches disappeared when margarine became associated with poverty and bad health. By the 2000s, butter was back, and margarine was what poor people ate. You can make them for about 30 cents today. Sandwich crackers and cheese sandwich when bread was too expensive. This was saltine crackers with slices of American cheese pressed between them. In 1970, this cost about 4 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 30 cents today. When bread ran out before payday, you used crackers. A box of saltines cost 20 cents. Cheese was expensive, but you only needed one slice. Press the cheese between 4 crackers. The crackers were dry and salty. The cheese added moisture and protein. This was lunch when there was no bread in the house. Kids ate these and felt embarrassed because crackers weren't bread. Cracker sandwiches disappeared when people had enough money to always have bread. By the 1980s, running out of bread meant you were too poor to grocery shop regularly. You can make them for about 35 cents today. Syrup sandwich when sugar wasn't sweet enough. This was white bread with butter and pancake syrup drizzled on top. In 1970, this cost about 5 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 40 cents today. Pancake syrup was cheaper than maple syrup. A bottle cost 50 cents and lasted for weeks. When you wanted something sweeter than sugar, you used syrup. Spread butter on bread, drizzle syrup over it, fold it in half so the syrup wouldn't drip. The syrup soaked into the bread and made it sticky sweet. This was dessert when there was no dessert. Kids ate these and got syrup all over their hands. Syrup sandwiches disappeared when they became too embarrassing to admit. Even people who ate butter and sugar sandwiches won't admit to syrup. You can make them for about 45 cents today. Biscuit sandwich, leftover biscuits, became lunch. This was a leftover biscuit split open with butter inside. In 1970, this cost about 4 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 30 cents today. Biscuits were made from flour, lard, and buttermilk. When there were leftover biscuits from breakfast, you'd split them and add butter for lunch. The biscuit was cold and slightly dry. The butter softened it. Some families added jelly or honey if they had it. Most just used butter. This was filling and tasted better than plain bread. Biscuit sandwiches never disappeared in the South. They're still eaten. But eating cold leftover biscuits marked you as poor. Biscuits weren't just bread. They were a marker of skill, of tradition, of regional identity. A woman who could make good biscuits had status in her community. Biscuit making was passed down from grandmother to mother to daughter, each generation learning the feel of the dough, the right amount of buttermilk, the proper folding technique. Making biscuits from scratch every morning showed you had time, skill, and dedication to feeding your family properly. The economics of biscuits made them ideal poverty food. A 5-pound bag of flour cost about 60 cents in 1970 and made dozens of batches of biscuits. Lard was cheap. A can cost about 40 cents and lasted for months. Buttermilk was affordable at 30 cents per quart. You could make a batch of 12 biscuits for less than 20 cents total. That's less than 2 cents per biscuit. No store-bought bread could compete with that price. The process of making biscuits was quick once you knew how. Mix flour, salt, and baking powder in a bowl. Cut in cold lard with a fork or your fingers until the mixture resembled coarse crumbs. Add buttermilk and stir just until combined. Overmixing made tough biscuits. Turn the dough onto a floured surface. Pat it out gently. Don't roll it with a rolling pin because that compressed the layers. Fold it over itself 2 or 3 times to create flaky layers. Pat it out to about ½ an inch thick. Cut with a biscuit cutter or the rim of a glass. Place the biscuits close together on a baking sheet so they'd rise tall instead of spreading wide. Bake at 450 degrees for 12 to 15 minutes until golden on top. Fresh biscuits were breakfast luxury. You'd split them open while they were still hot, and steam would rise from the fluffy interior. Add butter, and it would melt immediately, soaking into all those flaky layers. Add honey or jam, and you had something that felt special, even celebratory. Fresh biscuits with butter and honey were what you served to guests, what you made on Sunday mornings, what you ate when you wanted to feel like things were okay. But leftover biscuits were everyday reality. Most families made more biscuits than they needed for breakfast because biscuits were cheap and filling. The extras would sit on the counter, cooling and drying out as the day went on. By lunchtime, they were no longer fresh. They'd lost that tender, fluffy quality. They were firmer, drier, more compact. But they were still edible, and when you were poor, edible was enough. Splitting a cold biscuit took some force. The texture had changed. What was fluffy and tender when hot became dense and crumbly when cold. You'd use a knife to saw through it, and crumbs would scatter across the counter. The interior would be pale and dry-looking. Spread butter on both halves. The butter wouldn't melt. It would just sit there in a solid layer. Put the halves back together. That was lunch. The taste was okay, but not great. Cold biscuits had a pleasant buttermilk tang and a slightly salty, savory flavor. The butter added richness. But the texture was the problem. Dry and crumbly, requiring lots of chewing, absorbing all the moisture in your mouth. You'd need water or milk to wash it down. Some kids would dunk their biscuit sandwiches in milk to soften them, like cookies. Others would eat them dry and complain complain the whole time. The class implications of biscuit sandwiches were complicated. In the South, biscuits themselves weren't poverty food. Everyone ate biscuits, rich and poor alike. Fresh biscuits were standard breakfast across all economic levels. But leftover biscuits for lunch signaled something specific. It meant your family couldn't afford to make fresh biscuits twice a day. It meant you were eating yesterday's food instead of today's food. It meant your mother didn't have time to make a proper lunch because she was working or managing too many children or dealing with other problems. Wealthy families had leftover biscuits too, but they didn't eat them plain. They'd use them for other purposes, crumble them for dressing, feed them to dogs, make bread pudding, or they'd reheat them properly, split them, butter them, and warm them in the oven until they approximated fresh biscuits. Poor families didn't waste fuel reheating biscuits. You ate them cold. Children understood this distinction, even if no one explained it explicitly. The kids who brought biscuit sandwiches to school knew they marked them as poor. They'd eat them quickly, hoping no one noticed. They'd feel envious of the kids with store-bought bread sandwiches, even though, objectively, homemade biscuits were better quality than Wonder Bread. But store-bought meant your family had money to spend on convenience. Homemade meant you were making do. Some families tried to make biscuit sandwiches more interesting. If there was leftover bacon or sausage from breakfast, you'd add a piece to the biscuit. That elevated it from poverty food to something more respectable. A cold biscuit with meat was a legitimate sandwich. If there was jelly or honey, you'd add that. The sweetness helped mask the dryness. If there was nothing else, you'd add salt and pepper to the butter to give it more flavor. The regional pride around biscuits created a strange dynamic. Southerners were proud of their biscuit-making tradition. Biscuits were part of Southern identity, part of what made Southern food culture distinctive and valuable. But that pride didn't extend to eating cold leftover biscuits for lunch. That was still poverty, still making do, still something to be slightly ashamed of. Apple butter sandwich when jelly was too expensive. This was white bread with apple butter spread thick. In 1970, this cost about 6 cents per sandwich. That's roughly 50 cents today. Apple butter was cheaper than jelly. A jar cost 35 cents compared to 40 cents for jelly. That 5-cent difference mattered when you were feeding a family on a tight budget. Apple butter was made from cooked-down apples with sugar and spices. It was thick, dark, and intensely apple-flavored. You'd spread it on bread like jelly. The apple butter was sweet but also slightly tart. It tasted like fall. Some families made their own apple butter from cheap apples in October. This was preserves that lasted all winter. Apple butter sandwiches disappeared when jelly became affordable for everyone. By the 1980s, apple butter was specialty food instead of poverty food. You can make them for about 55 cents today, but there's more to this sandwich than just economics. Apple butter represented a connection to rural traditions that were fading even in the 1970s. Making apple butter was an all-day affair, peeling and chopping bushels of apples, cooking them down for hours until they turned dark and thick, canning them in jars to store for winter. This was preservation in the most literal sense. Apples were cheap and abundant in fall, but they didn't last. Apple butter turned temporary abundance into permanent sustenance. The process of making apple butter was communal. Families would gather, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and spend a Saturday in October making enough apple butter to last until spring. The children would peel apples. The women would stir the massive pots. The men would tend the fires. Everyone had a role. The kitchen would smell like cinnamon and cloves and apples cooking down. By evening, you'd have dozens of jars lined up on the counter, sealed and ready for storage. Store-bought apple butter was acceptable but inferior. Homemade apple butter was darker, thicker, more intensely flavored. It had chunks of apple that hadn't completely broken down. It tasted like the specific apples you'd used, tart Granny Smiths or sweet galas, or a mix of whatever was cheap at the orchard. Store-bought apple butter was uniform and smooth and tasted the same every time. Homemade apple butter was variable and textured and tasted like your family's recipe. Apple butter sandwiches were what children ate when their mothers were stretching the grocery budget. A loaf of white bread cost 25 cents and made 20 sandwiches. A jar of apple butter cost 35 cents and lasted for weeks. You could make apple butter sandwiches for less than 10 cents each. Compare that to peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at 15 cents each, or bologna sandwiches at 20 cents each. Apple butter was the economical choice, but economy wasn't the only reason families chose apple butter. It was also tradition. Apple butter connected you to the past, to grandmothers who'd made it in cast-iron kettles over open fires, to great-grandmothers who'd preserved apples because that's what you did to survive winter. Eating an apple butter sandwich meant participating in that history. It meant your family still valued the old ways, even as the modern world offered easier alternatives. The taste was distinctive. Apple butter didn't taste like fresh apples. It tasted like apples that had been transformed by heat and time into something richer and more complex. The long cooking caramelized the natural sugars in the apples. The spices, usually cinnamon, cloves, and allspice, added warmth and depth. The result was spread that was simultaneously sweet, tart, spicy, and deeply apple-flavored. It was autumn in a jar. Children had mixed feelings about apple butter sandwiches. Some loved them. The sweetness felt like a treat, almost like dessert for lunch. Others tolerated them. They were better than nothing, better than dry bread, but not as good as peanut butter and jelly. The texture could be off-putting. Apple butter was thick and sticky. It clung to the roof of your mouth. It made the bread soggy if you didn't eat it quickly. But when you were hungry, these details didn't matter much. The sandwiches were eaten cold, usually. There was no toasting, no grilling, no heating, just bread and apple butter, assembled quickly and eaten quickly. Some children ate them at school, packed in paper bags or metal lunchboxes. Others ate them at home after school, standing at the kitchen counter. They were utilitarian food, fuel for bodies that needed calories to grow and play and work. Apple butter sandwiches also represented seasonal eating in a way that's almost forgotten now. You ate apple butter sandwiches in fall and winter because that's when apple butter was available. By spring, the jars were running low. By summer, they were gone. Then fall would come again, and you'd make more. This rhythm connected you to the agricultural calendar, to the cycle of harvest and preservation and consumption. Modern life has erased most of these rhythms. We eat strawberries in December and apples in July. We've lost the sense of food having a season, a proper time. The sandwich also showed how poverty forced creativity. When you couldn't afford multiple types of sandwich fillings, you learned to appreciate what you had. Apple butter wasn't just cheap jelly. It was its own thing, with its own flavor and character. Some families added butter to the bread before spreading apple butter. The butter added richness and made the sandwich more filling. Others sprinkled cinnamon sugar on top of the apple butter for extra sweetness. These small variations showed that even with limited ingredients, people found ways to make food more interesting, more enjoyable, more their own. There was also pride in apple butter sandwiches, strange as that might sound. If your family made their own apple butter, you could tell people, "My grandmother made this." That homemade quality elevated the sandwich from poverty food to craft food. It showed that your family had skills, traditions, knowledge, passed down through generations. Store-bought apple butter was just cheap. Homemade apple butter was heritage. The disappearance of apple butter sandwiches tracks with broader economic and cultural changes. As the 1970s progressed into the 1980s, American families generally became more prosperous. The tight budgets of the early 1970s, shaped by recession and inflation, eased somewhat. Jelly became affordable for most families. Peanut butter and jelly became the default sandwich. Apple butter became something you bought at craft fairs or specialty stores, not something you ate regularly. The rise of convenience culture also played a role. Making apple butter required time, equipment, and knowledge. Buying jelly required a trip to the grocery store. As life became busier and more complicated, fewer families had time for all-day preservation projects. The skills and traditions around making apple butter faded. By the 1990s, most young people had never tasted homemade apple butter. They might have encountered it at Cracker Barrel or seen it in gift baskets, but it wasn't part of their daily lives. Apple butter also became associated with rural poverty in ways that made it socially awkward. In the 1970s, eating apple butter sandwiches just meant you were frugal or traditional. By the 1990s, it signaled that you were poor or backward. The cultural narrative around poverty had shifted. In the 1970s, being working class was still somewhat respectable. You worked hard, you made do, you survived. By the 1990s, poverty was seen as personal failure. Admitting you'd eaten apple butter sandwiches felt like admitting your family had failed economically. This shift is tragic because it erased valuable food traditions. Apple butter is delicious. It's also relatively healthy, just apples, sugar, and spices with no artificial ingredients or preservatives. It's sustainable, using local apples and traditional preservation methods. It's cultural heritage, connecting us to generations of people who knew how to make something from nothing. But we threw it away because it reminded us of being poor. The modern revival of apple butter is interesting but incomplete. You can buy artisan apple butter at farmers markets for $8 or $10 per jar. Specialty food stores sell heirloom apple butter made with heritage apple varieties. But this modern apple butter is disconnected from its roots. It's expensive, not economical. It's optional, not necessary. It's trendy, not traditional. The people buying $10 jars of apple butter at farmers' markets are probably not the same people whose grandmothers made it out of necessity. The cultural context has been stripped away. Apple butter has been gentrified. This gentrification happens to a lot of poverty foods. Cornbread used to be cheap sustenance. Now it's served at expensive southern restaurants for $6 per piece. Collard greens used to be what you ate because lettuce was expensive. Now they're a superfood at trendy brunch spots. Beans and rice used to be survival food. Now they're a base for Buddha bowls at health food cafes. The food remains, but the meaning changes. What was once necessity becomes choice. What was once survival becomes aesthetic. There's something both good and bad about this transformation. Good because it means these foods are valued again, preserved, continued. Bad because the people who originally created and depended on these foods often can't afford the gentrified versions. The grandmother who made apple butter to feed her children can't afford the $10 jar at the farmer's market. Her knowledge and tradition have been commodified and sold back to her at prices she can't pay. Apple butter sandwiches also remind us that poverty doesn't erase taste or pleasure. Poor people aren't eating flavorless gruel. They're eating what they can afford, but within those constraints, they're seeking flavor, variety, enjoyment. Apple butter sandwiches weren't gourmet, but they weren't punishment either. They were sweet and spicy and satisfying. They made children happy, at least sometimes. Poverty limits choices, but it doesn't eliminate the human desire for food that tastes good. The sandwich also shows how food carries memory. People who ate apple butter sandwiches as children often have strong emotional reactions to the taste decades later. Some feel nostalgia. The flavor brings back memories of childhood, of home, of family. Others feel discomfort. The taste reminds them of being poor, of going without, of harder times they'd rather forget. Food is never just food. It's always wrapped up in emotion, memory, identity. Making apple butter sandwiches today is an act of remembering. It's acknowledging that your family, or families like yours, ate these. It's refusing to pretend that poverty didn't exist or didn't matter. It's honoring the creativity and resilience of people who made something good from very little. It's also just enjoying a tasty sandwich that happens to be cheap and easy to make. You can make apple butter sandwiches for about 55 cents today. A loaf of store-brand white bread costs about $2 and makes 20 sandwiches, 10 cents per sandwich. A jar of apple butter costs about $4 at most grocery stores and makes at least 10 sandwiches, 40 cents per sandwich. Total cost, 50 cents per sandwich. That's still cheaper than most alternatives. It's definitely cheaper than buying lunch at a restaurant or even a fast food place. The sandwich is also quick to make. 30 seconds to spread apple butter on 2 slices of bread. No cooking, no heating, no complicated assembly. This speed mattered in the 1970s when mothers were making lunches for multiple children before school. It still matters today when time is scarce and mornings are rushed. But the real value of apple butter sandwiches isn't economic, it's cultural and emotional. Making these sandwiches connects you to a tradition of making do, of finding sweetness in hard circumstances, of feeding your family with whatever you have. It's a small act of resistance against a culture that says everything must be expensive to be valuable, that convenience is always better than tradition, that poverty is something to hide rather than survive. 30 sandwiches from working-class kitchens in the 1970s. Everyone kept families fed when money was tight. Everyone cost under 15 cents. Everyone disappeared when people had enough money to forget they'd ever been poor. These weren't recipes from cookbooks, they were survival. Mayonnaise on bread, butter and sugar, ketchup between slices. Your grandmother made these when there was nothing else. They cost almost nothing and kept empty stomachs full until the next meal. We don't make these anymore because we don't have to, and that's a good thing. But remembering them matters. These sandwiches are proof that people survived hard times with creativity and determination. They're proof that poverty doesn't mean giving up, it means making do. Let me know in the comments if your family ate any of these. And if you want more forgotten recipes from the 1970s, I'll see you in the next video. These 30 sandwiches represent more than just cheap meals. They represent an entire economic and social reality that most Americans would prefer to forget. The 1970s were a difficult decade economically. Inflation, recession, oil crises, unemployment. The prosperity of the post-war period was fading. Working-class families felt the squeeze acutely. These sandwiches were how they responded. Poverty food has always existed, but it's rarely documented. Cookbooks focus on aspirational cooking, what people want to eat, not what they're forced to eat. Food magazines showcase beautiful dishes made with expensive ingredients. Food television celebrates chefs and restaurants. But the food that most people eat most of the time, especially poor people, is invisible in our food culture. These sandwiches break that invisibility. They show what real people really ate when money was tight. They're not romanticized or prettified. They're not rustic or authentic in the trendy sense. They're just cheap food that filled stomachs and kept families going. There's a class dimension to this that's impossible to ignore. Middle-class and wealthy families didn't eat these sandwiches. They had access to variety, to protein, to fresh vegetables. Working-class and poor families ate what they could afford. The sandwich you brought to school signaled your family's economic status. Bologna sandwiches meant lower middle class. Mayonnaise sandwiches meant poor. The kids who ate mayonnaise sandwiches knew everyone could see their poverty. This created shame. Children were embarrassed by their lunches. They ate quickly, hoping no one would notice. They threw away the evidence. They lied about what was in their lunch boxes. The shame of poverty was internalized young. Food became a marker of worth, of belonging, of social status. If you couldn't afford a normal sandwich, you were less than. That shame persists into adulthood. People who ate these sandwiches as children often don't tell their own children about it. They've worked hard to achieve economic stability, to escape poverty. Admitting they ate ketchup sandwiches feels like admitting failure, like revealing a shameful secret. So the knowledge dies with them. Their children grow up not knowing that their parents survived hard times, not understanding the resilience that took. This erasure of poverty from family history is widespread and damaging. It creates a false narrative where everyone has always been middle class, where hard times didn't exist or weren't that bad. It makes current poverty seem like personal failure rather than systemic reality. It prevents intergenerational understanding and empathy. These sandwiches also show how poverty shapes taste and preference. If you grew up eating mayonnaise sandwiches, mayonnaise might be a comfort food for you, even though objectively, mayonnaise on plain bread isn't particularly good. Taste is learned. What we ate as children becomes what tastes like home, like safety, like love. This is why people have such strong emotional reactions to poverty food. It's not just about the food, it's about everything the food represents. The creativity within constraint is remarkable. These sandwiches show how people made food interesting with almost no resources. Butter and sugar transformed plain bread into something sweet. Crackers added texture to peanut butter. Pickles added tang to cheese. These weren't random combinations. They were thoughtful solutions to the problem of making boring food less boring. This creativity is a form of intelligence that's rarely recognized or valued. Poor people are often portrayed as passive victims who suffer deprivation, but these sandwiches show active problem-solving, adaptation, innovation. Your grandmother, who figured out that crackers pressed into peanut butter made a sandwich more interesting, was exercising creativity and intelligence. Day after day, year after year, these sandwiches represent their work, their creativity, their determination to keep their families fed no matter what. The disappearance of these sandwiches tracks with economic changes. As the 1980s brought relative prosperity to many working-class families, these sandwiches became unnecessary. Families could afford peanut butter and jelly, could afford lunch meat, could afford variety. The fact that these sandwiches disappeared is evidence of economic progress. People stopped eating them because they didn't have to anymore, but the memory of eating them didn't disappear. It just went underground. People remember, but don't talk about it. This creates a strange situation where millions of Americans share this experience but think they're alone in it. They don't realize how common these sandwiches were, how many other families ate the same things. Bringing these sandwiches back into public conversation serves multiple purposes. It acknowledges a reality that's been hidden. It validates the experiences of people who ate these sandwiches and felt ashamed. It shows younger generations what their parents or grandparents survived. It creates empathy for people currently experiencing poverty. It challenges the myth that everyone has always been middle class. It also preserves knowledge that might otherwise be lost. These sandwiches represent a specific historical moment, the economic conditions of the 1970s, the food available then, the prices, the constraints. Future historians studying this period will want to know what ordinary people ate. These sandwiches are primary source material for understanding working-class life in the 1970s. The emotional weight of these sandwiches is heavy. They represent hardship, struggle, deprivation, but they also represent resilience, creativity, love. The mother who made mayonnaise sandwiches for her children wasn't giving up. She was feeding them with what she had. That's love. It's not the love that buys expensive organic ingredients, but it's love nonetheless. Maybe it's even more profound because it persisted despite having so little to work with. We don't make these sandwiches anymore because we don't have to. That's progress. That's good. Nobody should have to eat mayonnaise sandwiches out of necessity, but remembering that people did, understanding why they did, honoring how they survived, that matters. These sandwiches are part of our collective history. They're part of how we got here. Forgetting them means forgetting where we came from. These sandwiches are proof that people survived hard times with creativity and determination. They're proof that poverty doesn't mean giving up. It means making do. They're proof that love and care can exist even in the most constrained circumstances. They're proof that ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges found ways to keep going, to keep their families fed, to maintain dignity and hope even when money ran out. Make one of these sandwiches, not because you have to, but because you can choose to. Taste what your grandmother tasted. Feel what she felt. Understand, just for a moment, what it was like to make something from almost nothing. Then be grateful you don't have to eat it every day. And remember that many people still do. Poverty hasn't disappeared just because we stopped talking about it. These sandwiches matter. They're not just food. They're history, memory, survival, love, shame, pride, creativity, determination, all pressed between two slices of white bread. They deserve to be remembered. The people who ate them deserve to be honored. And the lessons they teach about resilience, about making do, about surviving together, are lessons we still need.